the future of the democracy depends upon making sure the Republicans are not in the majority in the House and in the Senate in 2025. We can survive bad policy. We can't survive leaders who are going to torch the Constitution.
Hi again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. Bold statements from former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, essentially saying American democracy and the Republican Party can no longer coexist. Cheney spoke of how congressional Republicans know better, but follow the former president anyway. She said the number of people who believe Trump's lies is very small. They are enabling this danger, and they know it's a danger. That is what is so scary about the times we are currently in. Donald Trump did not have others around him enabling his autocratic ways, our system of government wouldn't be threatened. Trump could not do damage to our elections without others spreading the big lie. He could not weaponize the Department of Justice for his own benefit without those willing to do his bidding. He could not get away with hateful and anti-American rhetoric if everyone collectively called him out for it. And he could not be this close to tearing down our democracy without Republicans in Congress, the branch of government that is supposed to be a check against executive power, further pushing his agenda. As we have been discussing recently in our American Autocracy series, autocrats need others to build their power. A new review in The New Yorker looks at a book examining the history of Germany in the 1930s, concluding that Hitler did not seize power, he was given it. The review ends with an ominous message about history repeating itself. And although Trump is not mentioned by name, pretty easy to see the parallels. We see through a glass darkly as patterns of authoritarian ambition seem to flash before our eyes. The demagogue made strong not by conviction, but by being numb to normal human encouragements and admonishments. The aging center-left, the media lords who want something like what the demagogue wants, but in the end are controlled by him, the political maneuverers who think they can outwit the demagogue, the resistance and sudden surrender. Democracy doesn't die in darkness. It dies in bright, mid-afternoon light, where politicians fall back on familiarities and make faint offers to authoritarians and say a firm and final no. And then wake up a few days later and say, well, maybe this time it might all work out, and look at the other side. Precise circumstances never repeat, yet shapes and patterns so often recur. Liz Cheney, she is a rare exception right now in the Republican Party, not willing to surrender her country to an autocrat. The question, the big question, is will her efforts and the efforts of the few like her be enough to overcome the many enablers? And that is where we start this hour with professor of history at NYU and author of Strongman Mussolini to the Present, Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And with me at the table, professor of philosophy at Yale University and author of 6 different books, including How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, Jason Stanley, and host of the Fast Politics podcast and special correspondent for Vanity Fair, Molly Jong-Fast. How good to have you all with us. Ruth, let's start with you. Where would Donald Trump be if it were not for his followers and his enablers?
He'd be nowhere. And in fact, there are different types of enablers, and we have to get to all of them. There are the foot soldiers, the violent thugs who intimidate people on the street. There are the elite enablers, and here we have the GOP. And then there are kind of what Hannah Arendt called the desk killers, the bureaucrats who sign the papers and work in the civil service, which is why Project 2025 is focusing on them. And all of these types of people already created a coup attempt, which was January 6th, which broke so many taboos, if you look at it with a big lens, that it prepared for the next, the next stage of the onslaught on our democracy. And all of the enablers are complicit in this.
It's very easy to say, we've never seen this before. There's never been someone like Donald Trump before, and that is too facile a reading of history.
Absolutely. I mean, many democracies fall to autocrats. The United States is not some massively special country, as we're witnessing right now. Autocrats only win if fascists only win if people who would never describe themselves as fascists support them. They think that those autocrats can get their goals done for them. So in Germany, in Nazi Germany, the CEOs thought that Hitler would deal with the labor unions. And so they thought they could control him. He'll deal with the labor unions, so they'll vote for him, even though there was obvious signs that he was an autocrat. And that's what we're seeing today. We're seeing different groups of people who wouldn't themselves describe themselves as fascist supporting a fascist leader.
Is that the retort then when you're at dinner with someone and they say, well, it's tax policy. I'm voting on tax policy.
That's right. Or I'm voting on abortion, or, I'm voting on law and order or immigration, or LGBT, anti-LGBT rights. In each case, people would deny that they're against democracy, but they see this as the quickest way to get their agenda done. And it's always the case that the autocrat promises the different groups to get their agenda done. Trump promised to end Roe versus Wade. He brags about that. He brags about, he gives his constituents what they want as long as they support his autocratic ambitions to end American democracy.
I'm so struck, Molly, by the way that Ruth laid out the fact that you have the foot soldiers, you have the elite enablers. We talk about those folks a lot. And then you have the desk killers, the civil servants who are willing to execute. Of those, who do you worry about most?
I mean, I think the House GOP is not covering themselves with glory right now, right? They've installed Mike Johnson, MAGA Mike Johnson, really Donald Trump's guy. And remember, his bona fides were basically that he helped try to overturn the 2020 election. Yep. So he's, very much, and then, they tried to impeach. They're still working on this vibes-based impeachment of Joe Biden.
The vibes are not good right now for them.
It seems like it's Peter. There's a vibe shift with that impeachment, I think, and it looks like they have no crimes nor misdemeanors, neither high nor otherwise. And then they're still trying to impeach Mayorkas. And these are things they are doing because Donald Trump told them to.
Right. And I mean, Ruth, the thing is, even as the vibes are off in the impeachment, they're still talking of Comer talking about a potential criminal referral so that Donald Trump, should he get a second term, has a roadmap for how he would prosecute his predecessor. That, of course, sort of straight out of the authoritarian playbook. You have a new op-ed about Trump's praising of dictators. And in it, you write, Americans are the most important audience for the stream of praise he directs to autocrats. Trump's repeated elevation of dictators as models of leadership should be understood as part of a re-education strategy, conditioning Americans to see authoritarianism as a superior form of government to democracy. That is likely why he is explicitly making strongman rule his brand, telling Americans it is in their interest to allow him to save them from the supposed chaos and crime of democracy and give them an orderly authoritarian world under his control. I mean, it is hard, given how much that terrifies everyone at this table, you sitting with us, that actually is inspiring to a lot of Americans.
It is, and it was terrifying to write it. I'm sorry I had to write it, and it's the same. That's why I wrote Strongmen, which was terrifying to write as well, to warn Americans that no place is immune from this kind of thing, and that the elements of this authoritarian playbook repeat. We're talking about Germany. Hitler actually, he got himself cleaned up, but he also played the victim. I have a reproduction of a poster in my book. It's unbelievable, where there was a ban on him, public speaking, placed on him in the mid-20s because of his hate speech, which was out there in the open. All the enablers knew about it. And the Nazi Party made political performance and political capital out of this. They actually printed a poster depicting Hitler as a victim of what we call today cancel culture, with his mouth taped over. And it said, of all the people in Germany, only I am not allowed to speak. It sounds like something Donald Trump would say today. So the victimhood, the getting the enablers, including rich people who introduced Hitler, to the right people, so he would have kind of donations come in. All of that repeats, and it looks different every time. So we may think that, well, it's not going to happen here, or it's not going to happen to me because I'm not an immigrant. But we can learn from history and know that nobody is safe when someone like a Trump is around.
In light of that, Jason, it struck me that over the weekend at a rally in Ohio, you had Trump saying that President Biden is a threat to democracy, that if he were to win, it would be the last American election, not really completing the thought, right? Not sort of ominously leaving it vague as to why it would be that there would be no future election. But this is a strategy. It's just not an off-the-cuff remark.
Absolutely. Projection. It's a classic strategy of fascist leaders. Look at Putin. Putin calls Ukrainians fascists when the Russian Empire, Russia is in fact a fascist country right now. So you can tell what Trump is going to do from what he imputes to Biden. So he's telling you that there will be no election if he is elected. And furthermore, this strategy is meant to take the fangs out of the charge that he's a threat to democracy. It's meant so people are confused. He's saying, no, the other guy's a threat to democracy. He's reversing every charge against him in order to make everything unclear.
So what's the antidote to that?
The solutions I don't necessarily provide.
You're like, I'm a professor of philosophy, not of practice. But you know what I mean, which is to those of us here on Earth One, as Nicole likes to say, we say when President Biden says that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, he can say, look at what happened on January 6th. Look at what happened in the lead up to January 6th. There is a rationale for why I believe that this person is dangerous. When Donald Trump says it, it's just sort of like an ellipse at the end of a sentence.
Well, it's meant to take the fangs out of that charge against him, which is clever. However, Trump also always tells you what he's going to do. So this is an old point in the literature on authoritarians. They always tell you what you're going to do. He's many times said he was going to be a dictator for the day. He said he's going to target his political opponents. Why people don't take that seriously is one of the mysteries of history.